Hi, I'm Nancy Rudolph Murray, and the Murray part of my name comes from my husband of 12 years, John Murray, and the Rudolph part of my name comes from my husband, Robert Rudolph. He and I joined this church in 1992 after I was invited to come to church by Eileen Richards to a mom's group, so that's how that happened. We have 3 children, Jonathan, Kelly, and Grace. This is a story that I was reminded of, and it's Bob's testimony of how he came to the Lord when Pastor Brent told this story in church a couple months ago. And afterwards we were talking, and I told him some more of the awesome details as a testimony to the Lord. And he said, why don't I come down and share my testimony about this? So that was very kind of Pastor Brent to do that. In 1991, first of all, we belonged to we were attending the Congregational Church in Georgetown, and Bob had been going to a Bible study there. And after going to that study, he'd been studying with another couple and the pastor, he said, I'd like to get baptized. And he didn't mean immersed, he meant sprinkled. So when the babies were there getting sprinkled in May, is certainly as valid as anything, May or June, he was 60 years old and he got baptized. So that was a little precursor to what happened in August. And Bob was an attorney in Georgetown. He had a practice, and he loved the ocean. He loved to sail. We had a sailboat. He liked to be in, on, or under the water. He scuba dived. He just enjoyed it all. So he used to do navigating for sailboats. He did a transatlantic crossing before we met. He was in the Bermuda race as a navigator. He'd had a lot of experience. And in 1991, he had a unique opportunity to go down to the Caribbean and help to bring some boats from the charter trade back up for the Newport Boat Show. So the boat was 51 feet, and the people who owned the boat thought they could recoup their losses for paying for Bob to do this if they advertised to some people that they could have an experience of being out on the ocean and learning how to navigate in that week or 10 days that it took to bring the boat up from San Salvador was the second. There were 2 legs of the trip, and 7 people would be on that boat. So that was a small space for 7 people to be on. Bob and I had never been separated that long in our whole marriage. We'd been married for 16 years at that point, and that was a big adventure. So I was going to be at home with the kids, and we went up to Maine to stay in our cottage, and Bob went off, and there were no cell phones, so we really didn't know how he was faring. They did the first leg of the trip. The first week worked out well. Everybody had their chance to learn to navigate. And then the second week was going to begin from San Salvador. And they checked all of the weather reports. Any of the stations said, clear sailing. This is going to be a piece of cake. It's going to be a milk run. And they got out in the middle of the ocean on the way home, and it turned out that was not the case. The first indication that things weren't going to go so well was that a little land bird was exhausted and landed on the boat when it was far out to sea. And everybody said, oh, isn't that wonderful? Look at this little bird. We could hold it in our hands. And Bob looked at it and said, no, it's not wonderful. That means something drove that bird out to sea. There must be terrible weather coming. And indeed, there was terrible weather coming. And pretty soon they were in the midst of a hurricane, a full-blown hurricane. And Bob said the sound was like a freight train. The troughs of water were like 30 feet when the boat would go down, and then it would come up. They got knocked down at one point. The people were terrified. I never saw Bob frightened on the ocean, but he was very worried about taking care of these people and seeing that they got back safe. So he said he just went down to his small cabin, and he got down on his knees and he said, Lord, I can't do this. Help me. And he heard the voice of the Lord loud and clear, even though it sounded like a freight train out on the ocean. And the voice said, be at peace, do not fear. And he was infused with the love of the Lord. And he said, I got up, And I went up on deck, and I was sitting there with the rain driving sideways into my face, and I had a big goofy grin on my face, and some guy said, "What are you so happy about?" And Bob said, "I have no idea. I just know that we're going to be all right." And they were all right. They made it safely back to Newport, Rhode Island, and when they finally made it there, they found out that the name of that hurricane, in case you don't think God has a sense of humor, was Hurricane Bob. It had his name written all over it. And I looked it up and saw that that hurricane had sustained winds of 110 miles per hour and did about $1.5 billion in damage. It was a crazy hurricane, if you remember that, back in 1991. So I like the fact that Bob was obedient to become baptized a few months earlier, and then the Lord saw him through that. So some years later, Bob was diagnosed with cancer, and after a couple of years of that, I was fretting one day, and he said to me, when that voice spoke to me and said, "Be at peace, do not fear," it meant for the rest of my life. And I said, I didn't know that. And you know, the Lord took us through that. He passed away in 2006. He's gone to glory now. But the Lord was so faithful in all of that. So I just wanted to share that story.